huge, and it screamed like what you probably heard and what I heard. And then he saw it run. Now, you ready for this one? It didn't just run on two legs. It ran between 2 and 4, 2 and 4. Now, that's what I saw.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if, who's to say they can't do that, I mean, I don't know. I didn't see the one I saw do that, but mine wasn't really running. It was just walking up and away from us, pissed off, so.
You were lucky. You could have been its dinner.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we got out. And my grandpa knew enough to get us out of there, thank God. But like I said, it was a long distance between our side of the river and that side of the river. 60, 75 yards, but when we saw it, you could see it clear as a bell. I mean, it was a giant, hair-covered, man-looking creature, walking on two legs just like we walk, and it was shaking and grabbing trees and just yelling and screaming, and it was just god-awful sound most god-awful sound I've ever heard,
No, that's what I had nightmares was the sound. But I will tell you this, it went as far because it was like probably 25, 30 feet away from the car when it bent that tree over. But I'll tell you the stench. Now, this was like the first week of June up in the Canadian Rockies. There was still snow everywhere on the side of the roads and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I tell you what, it was chilly that day. I remember it was cold. It wasn't warm. And I remember the stench was so bad that I couldn't breathe through my nose. It burnt my nose that bad. And then I tried breathing through my throat, opening my mouth and breathe through that, and it burnt my throat. I've never had anything that strong, ever. And the smell was so nauseous that it took a few miles driving the vehicle after we got off that back road onto the main road with the windows down, even air the car out. That's how bad it was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, down south they call it the skunk ape. I'm sure it's that for a reason.
So
I was lucky enough I didn't have to smell it.
Yeah. I tell you what, I'd rather get sprayed by a skunk again, which that happened one time in my life. Here's the thing: I hear these people say, "Oh, I was at a campground and I saw a Bigfoot, or I was up such and such, and you know what? I can see a Bigfoot every time I go out." How often do you go out? Oh, a couple of times a week. I see Bigfoot. Yeah, I start wondering about things like that because you know what? I was in the middle of nowhere. And that's when we ran across one. We weren't looking for one. We ran across it. These people that go out and go a couple miles, or not even a couple miles, a couple 100 feet away from a campground on a trail and say, oh, they saw a Bigfoot. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. You're going to have that happen. I mean, it is. I've interviewed people that swear they've had multiple encounters, and you got, like I said, you got to take it with a grain of salt until you go out and just try to find some physical evidence of that. And I had one lady tell me that her grandma, there was a family of Bigfoots that would come into where she lived out in the woods down in Florida almost every spring. And they would stay for a few weeks out there in the woods, and she would leave them food on the porch, and they would talk in some weird gibberish, and that she never had one violent encounter or anything. And this was an old 80-year-old grandma, at the time. She's no longer alive, but, she, and then when the woman told me about her grandma, she let me call her grandma on the phone, and I talked to her for about 4 hours about it. And, she sounded sincere and really had nothing to gain by telling the story. So you never know, I look at them as possibly being like people, we got black ones, white ones, red ones, yellow ones, Asian, the whole 9 yards, and if you look at a lot of the reports, they vary in size and color all around the world. So I look at them kind of like being the same type of creature, there's just different races of that creature, which makes sense. I mean, we find new species on this planet every day, almost. Was what 2 years ago they found a brand new species of orangutan in Sumatra they never knew about, and it was there the whole time. So, and many other things. The giant squid was thought to be a mythological creature as told by sailors for hundreds of years, and turns out they really exist.
Well, I think
So, you know,
I think these things do exist. Otherwise, I wouldn't see one. I don't think it's a hologram. I don't think it is a spirit, because I watched it. You know, the dent in the car. If it's a spirit, I don't
Right.
see how it could have done that. I watched it bend a 4 or 5 inch tree over like nothing. It was scary.
hmm Yep. I mean, like I said, until we get some physical specimen of some sort, I don't know. We just have to make judgments and opinions based off of experience and other people's experiences.
Now, how about, like, have you got any caster footprints, or have you seen any, anything like,
I have only found one print in all my years of looking for these things, and it was actually on the border of West Virginia and Ohio on the Ohio River. And I wasn't even investigating Bigfoot at the time. I was up there doing a haunting investigation, and had some beautiful woods out behind this cabin I was staying in. So I had some downtime, so I just took a hike out through there. And the ground, it hadn't rained in quite some time, and the ground was hard as concrete. And I got about 300 or 400 yards out back of that cabin, and I looked down, and there was a footprint, a humanoid-looking footprint in that hard soil. I mean, it was so hard that, I mean, it was like concrete. You couldn't even hardly kick up any dirt from it with your foot, with a shoe on. And it was a definite human footprint. I took pictures of it. I didn't have any casting material at the time, and it was a small one, though. And there was no reason anyone would have been in their right mind would have been hiking out in that particular area in bare feet. So if it was a Bigfoot track, it was definitely a juvenile, because it was only like maybe a 6 or 7, shoe size in length. And it was just kind of like, wow, here I am not even investigating Bigfoot sightings, even though this whole area has them. I'm doing something else, and I come across this weird print out in the middle of the woods. And it was degraded, but it was definitely, you could see all the toes and everything. So it was pretty nuts, and definitely wasn't a bear track.
Wow. Now, I know James has some questions. James, you got about 5 minutes or so before we have to go to the next break. You want to go ahead and ask those questions you have?
Yeah, sure. Why not? One question I want to ask is about the down there in West Virginia, where the Mothman is, in the military war department area. What's going on with that land down there? With all the sightings of Mothman and other things.
Are you talking about the TNT bunker area in Point Pleasant?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so that's that was shut down many years ago by the government, right toward the end of the war. We didn't have the need for all this explosive manufacturers, and they shut it down. So it was used over the years by many different coal mining companies to store their explosives for, blowing up mines and everything to extract coal. And it was so polluted with chemicals from World War II that they had to get all this federal money to come in and clean that whole area up, because it's very swampy out in there, and it really polluted that whole area. And they finally, it took them like 15, 20 years, but they finally got it really good and clean and got all the chemicals there. And I mean, there's still some chemicals in the area, but people can hunt and fish out there now and everything, and it's open. It's open, and there's still ongoing sightings of the Mothman type creature to this day off and on out of there.
Wow. Let me ask you another question. That day when your grandfather had that sighting, do you think there might have been more than one Bigfoot there that day?
It's possible. It was kind of funny, a side note to that story. So I never told anybody, I made a promise to my grandfather. And doing what I do now, after he died, I said, I always get that question, what started me in the paranormal, when I'm on these radio shows and stuff. And I told about a different story, but in reality, I made a promise that I didn't break until after my grandfather died. And I had to start telling this experience, because this is what really got me going into all of it. And I wanted my uncle to know because, you know, I didn't want him to just be taken by surprise by I just come out and talk about this story, you know, this experience me and my grandfather had back in '83. So I called him on the phone because I told him, look, I said, this is what happened. We were fishing and this and that and this and that. And I said, I'm going to start telling this story on the radio. And I just didn't want you guys to be blindsided by it if someone came up and asked you about it, you know. And he's like, oh, yeah, you're talking about that monkey man you and Papa saw in the woods all them years ago. And I said, what, he told you? And he goes, well, yeah, he came to me like 25 years ago and said, hey, Stanton, I want someone else to know in case something ever happens to me. I want someone else to know what me and David saw that day, but you keep it under your hat. So he actually told my uncle about it because he was worried that no one else would know but me and him, and if something happened to him, he wanted someone else in the family to know about it. So I was kind of taken back because I was like, man, here I have kept this secret all these years, you know, and he went and told my uncle. But it is what it is, and I'm glad he told him, you know. And so I find out from my uncle after that talk, during that talk, that he and his friends, only a few miles away from where me and my grandpa had my sightings, they were in an old moonshiner's cave, and that's where they used to go party when they were, you know, in their teens and early 20s back in the 60s and 70s. And he said him and two of his best friends were out there, and they would swim in the river because it's right there. And they had a really scary experience one night when they were in the cave. They would, you know, have a fire and drink beer and stuff. And he said something, it sounded like multiple things were out in the woods just past the firelight, and were making these most god-awful screams and howling noises, and they were throwing rocks at them from the woods into the cave. And he said it scared them so bad they just left all their stuff and they ran out of there and never, ever went back. And then my other uncle, who's my great uncle, who was my grandmother's brother, he was cutting firewood a few miles away from the same area one time. And he told my uncle that he was cutting wood, you know, he had the saw on, and he happened to look up, and he said there was a Bigfoot standing like 10 feet away from him, and he fell backwards over the log, almost cut his leg off. And he left his saw, his chainsaw, and everything out there, and never went back. So here in a small little area, I had several reports from family members that had strange experiences as well.
Wow, unbeknownst to you. I'll tell you, and then you find out all this afterwards. Let me ask you this. We only got about a minute
many years later, and I had no clue that other people, and then, you know, you start talking to more and more people, and just in my county, you know, there's a ton of sightings here of Bigfoot.
Okay, well,
and all around West Virginia, really.
We got to go to break, Dave. We got to go to break. Hang in there, and we'll be back after the break.
All right.
And he drove his motorcycle that fast. He drove a big chop hog with a gang colors jacket, and he ran down citizens for laughs. He had an old lady named Petula, packed an automatic 45 gun. They had just come up from California, where they shot 6 cops for fun.
Jake thought it was the best there was down the interstate 8 roar, till the day he tangled with the county sheriff. They all called 104.
It was late on a Thursday evening, and Jake, he was feeling kinda mean, 'cause he'd just run out of his favorite drug, you know, the one called amphetamine. So he sauntered up to Petula, and he said, say, baby, let's split. There's a little gas station on down the road that might be fun to hit. So they drove up to the station, and they both jumped off Jake's ride. They were up to derision at Jake's decision as they both sauntered to the inside. The attendant, he was an old man, and you know he didn't think it very funny. When Petula would out, that great big gunner said,
honey, give me all your money.
Well, the old man opened up the cash drawer, and Jake grabbed the money and ran with Petula out the door to the big chopped hog that was parked on the center kickstand. Then they headed out for the 4-lane, and they thought it was lots of fun. with Jake and his hog, with the tool of the dog, with the automatic 45 gun.